most people who lived through the Mongol invasions, the experience was sheer devastation, an unstoppable force of destruction sweeping through their lands. But for Takezaki Suenaga, a samurai who fought in both failed Mongol invasions of Japan, these events offered not terror, but opportunity, a chance to achieve honour and lasting fame on the battlefield. In this second episode of our Mongol Invasion of Japan series, we turn to Suenaga's own account of these invasions, a rare first-hand narrative preserved in illustrated scrolls he commissioned himself, offering us a glimpse into his experience and the mindset of a warrior facing one of history's most formidable foes. Little is known of Suenaga's life before the invasions. He was a gokunin, or houseman, a minor samurai from Higo province in Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's main islands. As a member of the Takezaki clan, he owned land, could outfit himself with horse and armour, and brought 5 retainers to battle. This was typical for a Kyushu samurai, and slightly above what a mid-ranking warrior from Honshu, Japan's largest island, might provide. At 29 on the eve of the first invasion in 1274, Suenaga was embroiled in a land dispute that put his finances at risk. Beyond these facts, his early life remains obscure. Higo province's location in western Kyushu placed Suenaga near Hakata Bay, the critical natural harbour the Mongol fleet, sailing from Korea, would inevitably target. By 1268, Suenaga and his peers were likely on alert as the Kamakura Bakufu, the military government, prepared for the looming threat. We've explored the diplomatic breakdown between Japan and Kublai Khan in our last episode, so we'll move forward here. When the Mongol fleet set sail in November 1274, it quickly captured Tsushima and Iki Islands. As they approached Hakata Bay, Kyushu's samurai, including Suenaga, were mobilised. Although samurai often fought alongside kin from the same clan, they were not strictly bound to do so. Suenaga, while part of the Takezaki clan, operated largely on his own initiative. By the time Suenaga and his small force arrived, mounted, armed and ready, the Mongols had already pierced the defensive lines at Hakata. Trained from childhood in archery, riding and swordsmanship, Suenaga wore his distinct yoroi armour, layered iron and lacquered leather plates tied with coloured cords. His main weapon was the powerful, asymmetrical Yumi longbow, heavier and larger than the Mongol bow. Among his group was a bannerman who marked Suenaga's position during battle. Although the sword, at this time, not yet the iconic katana, served as his sidearm, the naginata, a long pole weapon, was often the preferred choice once the fighting closed to hand-to-hand range. When Takezaki Suenaga reached the Mongol encampment at Akasaka, several kilometres inland, the Mongols had already set up a temporary base. The Japanese commander overseeing the samurai gathering there, Shoni Kagesuke, ordered the incoming warriors, including Suenaga, to pull back and wait for reinforcements. The terrain was unfavourable for the Japanese, and the hope was to lure the Mongols forward, disrupting their formation and exposing them to concentrated Japanese archery. Suenaga initially obeyed but quickly became impatient. Urging his horse ahead, he declared, "Waiting for the general will only make us late to battle. Of all the warriors of the clan, I, Suenaga from Higo, will be the first to fight." In the warfare culture of medieval Japan, battlefield valour was the key to recognition. Rewards were granted for acts like being the first into combat, slaying enemies, or suffering losses, and could include fine clothing, horses, or even new lands. For a lesser samurai like Suenaga, who risked not only his life but his expensive armour and horse, such rewards were critical. Even beyond material gains, the prestige of battlefield heroism carried great social weight. However, this system incentivized rashness over discipline. As Suenaga charged forward, one of Kagesuke's men urged him to stop, but Suenaga retorted, "We 5 will fight before you. We won't settle for merely shooting the enemy. My only purpose in life is to advance and be known." Recognizing he couldn't hold Suenaga back, Kagesuke told him he would personally witness his actions, a necessary step, since without tangible trophies like enemy heads, samurai relied on witnesses to validate their claims for rewards. Contradictory testimonies could void recognition from the shogunate. On his way toward Akasaka, Suenaga passed fellow samurai carrying severed Mongol heads. Learning the Mongols had retreated toward the beach in 2 groups, He spurred his horse onward, aiming to intercept the smaller force. But as he pursued them, Suenaga found himself mired in coastal mudflats. By the time he freed his horse, the Mongols had regrouped at Sahara. Again, one of his retainers urged caution, pointing out the reinforcements approaching behind them, which would improve both their chances and ensure witnesses. True to character, Suenaga dismissed the advice, shouting, "The way of the bow and arrow is to do what's worthy of reward. Charge." At last reaching the Mongols on the beach, Suenaga proudly noted that his bannerman led the charge, but they were met by a storm of Mongol arrows. The bannerman's horse was shot out from under him. Suenaga and 3 retainers were wounded, and finally Suenaga's own horse was hit, throwing him into the sand. This dramatic moment, Suenaga tumbling forward, blood pouring from a wound, is famously captured in the illustrated scrolls he later commissioned. In one version, a Mongol bomb explodes nearby. However, the style of this depiction suggests it was a later artistic addition. Suenaga himself never mentions facing explosives, and while archaeological evidence confirms the Mongols used bombs, it's unlikely this small skirmishing force hurled any at Suenaga's party. Thrown from his horse and under a hail of Mongol arrows, Takezaki Suenaga admits in his account that he likely would have perished were it not for the timely charge of a cavalry unit from Hizen province, led by the formidable Shiroishi Rokuro Michiyasu. According to Suenaga, Shiroishi rode straight through the Mongol lines, both horse and rider emerging remarkably unscathed. Impressed, Suenaga acted as an official witness to Shiroishi's valour. Not all were so fortunate. Suenaga recounts watching another Gokunin struck fatally in the neck by an arrow. After brief skirmishes, the Mongol force they had pursued retreated to their ships, bringing Suenaga's role in the first Mongol invasion to an end. As we've covered before, the fleet soon departed, driven back to Korea by strong winds, though notably Suenaga himself makes no mention of any divine winds or storms, framing the victory purely as the result of Japanese arms. The most detailed episode in Suenaga's illustrated scrolls follows his journey to Kamakura in 1275 to claim his rewards. Lacking funds, Suenaga sold his horse and saddle to finance the long trip from Kyushu to the military capital. Upon arrival, he faced disappointment. Court officials dismissed his claims, viewing him as a minor, unimportant warrior. It's here that Suenaga shows his strongest faith in divine favour. After fervently praying at a local Hachiman shrine, he secured a meeting with the Office of Appeals, led by Adachi Yasumori, the military governor of Suenaga's home province, Higo, and one of Japan's most powerful figures, being the father-in-law of Shiken Hojo Tokimune. Suenaga explained his case, only to learn that Kagesuke's brother, Tsunesuke, the military governor of Chikuzen, had failed to mention Suenaga's deeds in his official battle report. With no physical proof, neither slain enemies nor fallen retainers, Suenaga boldly swore that if Kagesuke denied his story under oath, they could execute him on the spot. Moved, Yasumori personally took the matter to Hojo Tokimune. Suenaga was at last recognised, rewarded with a fine horse and saddle, and saw his land dispute resolved in his favour. Of the 120 samurai commended for their role in the 1274 defence, Suenaga was the only one to receive personal acknowledgement from the shogun. Grateful, Suenaga memorialised Yasumori in his scrolls and, in his will, urged his descendants to remain loyal to the Adachi family. The Kamakura Bakufu was notably reluctant to distribute rewards for the Mongol invasions. In typical Japanese conflicts, spoils taken from the defeated domestic rivals provided compensation for loyal warriors. But against an external enemy, especially one that retreated overseas, there were no confiscated lands or goods. Rewards had to come directly from the Bakufu's coffers. To curb mounting demands, the government even temporarily forbade Kyushu samurai from travelling to Kamakura to petition for rewards, citing military necessity. This policy, as we will explore in the next episode, planted the seeds of tension between the Bakufu and the warrior class, a tension that would have serious consequences in the years to come. Hojo Tokimune and the Kamakura Bakufu knew perfectly well that the Mongol defeat in 1274 was only temporary. Confident that Kublai Khan would return with a larger force, they launched an extraordinary defence effort. Along Hakata Bay, they constructed a massive seawall over 20 kilometers long, rising up to 3 meters high and wide at key landing points. Provincial warriors from Kyushu were rotated on 3-month guard shifts, while the Shugo, or military governors, were brought more tightly under Hojo control to ensure smoother coordination. Across Japan, temples were ordered to offer prayers for national protection, and by late 1275, there was even talk, though perhaps more symbolic than serious, of launching a counterattack against Korea. When the Song dynasty finally fell to Kublai in 1279, the Great Khan had access to unprecedented resources and manpower for his side ventures, including a full-scale assault on Japan. The numbers were staggering. Roughly 40,000 troops from northern China, Mongolia, and Korea departed from Korean ports on about 900 ships, while nearly 100,000 men from the former Song territories prepared to sail from southern China on some 3,500 vessels. It was, arguably, the largest amphibious invasion in world history before the Normandy landings of 1944. Yet the sheer size masked its fragility. Many of the southern ships were rivercraft, ill-suited to ocean voyages, while others were hastily built under the impatient eye of Kublai himself. The northern fleet, led by seasoned Korean sailors, was ready to meet the southern fleet at Iki Island. But delays, including the death of a southern commander and rotting provisions in the southern ports, forced the northern force to press ahead alone. By June 10, 1281, Iki was seized, and the fleet set sail for Hakata Bay once more. This time, however, the Japanese seawall proved its worth. UN troops struggled to land, as Japanese archers atop the fortifications drove them back repeatedly. For 2 months, the Mongol fleet was stalled, occupying nearby Shiga Island but failing to capitalize on the arrival of the southern fleet. Enter Takezaki Suenaga, now 35, arriving at Hakata Bay, eager for glory, but facing a peculiar problem. He had no ship. With the Mongols anchored offshore, Japanese samurai took the fight to the invaders by sailing out in small boats to board Yuan vessels. Suenaga and his retainers raced along the beach, desperate to find transport, but every craft was already full. Just as hope faded, they spotted the flag of Adachi Yasumori, the powerful commander Suenaga had dealt with years before. Boarding a tiny messenger skiff, barely seaworthy in deep waters, Suenaga and his men reached Yasumori's ship. To the irritation of Yasumori's retainers, Suenaga vaulted aboard, boldly claiming that he had been ordered to join the vessel by the military governor. Unsurprisingly, the crew saw through this ruse and prepared to toss him overboard. Pleading, Suenaga offered to leave if they would just grant him a small boat of his own, but, as you might guess, that request did little to change their minds. Suenaga, ever eager for action, tried his luck again, this time on the ship of the Lord Tsumori. Annoyed by his persistence, Tsumori's men reluctantly allowed him aboard, though there was no room for Suenaga's retainers. Left behind on the shore, they voiced their frustration, but Suenaga brushed it off with the words, "Such is the way of the bow and arrow." In his rush, he forgot his helmet and, improvising, tied 2 shin guards to his head as makeshift protection. When they neared an enemy vessel, Suenaga attempted to board, but was wounded in the process. Undeterred, he cast aside his bow, seized a naginata, and bellowed at the rowers to close in on the enemy ship. To his irritation, the rowers, fearing for their own lives, tried instead to push away. Not one to be deterred, Suenaga switched ships again and finally managed a boarding action later that day, earning another wound but the honour of being the first from his province listed in the official battle report, a source of immense pride. Suenaga's final combat against the Mongols took place during the Japanese effort to drive the invaders from Shiga Island. In that battle, one of his retainers and a family member were wounded, and they lost 2 horses. Yet the Yuan fleet faced far worse. Disputes among Mongol, Chinese and Korean commanders undermined coordination, and many southern Chinese soldiers, conscripted into a foreign war, fought without enthusiasm. Frustration mounted as supplies dwindled and no progress was made. Then, on August 15th, 1281, nature intervened. As the sea churned and winds howled, the massive fleet tried to escape to deeper waters. But the ships of the southern fleet, designed for rivers and coastal waters, were torn apart by the typhoon. Many were smashed against the rocks or dragged to the seafloor. Archaeological finds near Tsushima Island still mark their watery graves. The sturdier Korean ships endured better, but even among the northern fleet, roughly a third were lost. Those UN soldiers who survived the wrecks and reached Kyushu, or neighbouring islands, faced a grim fate. Many were hunted down and killed, though Japanese sources note that some southern Chinese were spared, enslaved rather than executed. And so ended the second, and most ambitious, Mongol invasion of Japan. Furious Kublai Khan demanded preparations for a third assault, but that is a story we will explore in the next episode. Suenaga characteristically offers no commentary on the broader outcomes of the conflict once his own role in the fighting concluded. His illustrated scrolls, compiled between roughly 1293 and 1324, focus narrowly on his personal exploits and the memory of Adachi Yasumori, his key patron, who had been assassinated in 1285, rather than providing a comprehensive account of the campaigns. The very existence of these scrolls is striking. For a provincial samurai far from the political centre, commissioning such an elaborate and costly work was rare. The scrolls depict vivid battle scenes, with meticulously detailed armour, horses, and warriors. Although Suenaga's status had been modest during the first invasion in 1274, by the time of the second campaign, he had considerably enriched himself. This wealth came largely from donations made to a shrine under his control, and from lending agricultural seeds at steeply inflated interest rates. When peasant borrowers defaulted, Suenaga was quick to seize their lands. Creating the scrolls required substantial foresight and resources, traits not commonly associated with most samurai of his era. That the scrolls have survived to the present is itself remarkable. The Takezaki family lost possession of them in the late 14th century, when local conflicts engulfed their territories, and the scrolls, along with other valuables, were seized. Over the following centuries, the scrolls passed through the hands of various families. At one point, their owners perished during Japan's invasions of Korea in the 1590s. It was not until the 18th century that copies were first made, preserving their content, and in 1890, they were formally presented to Emperor Meiji. Today they are housed in Japan's Museum of the Imperial Collections, where they remain an invaluable source for scholars and the public alike. If you're eager to learn more about the Mongol invasions of Japan, be sure to listen to the previous episode in this series. Our next podcast episode will conclude this mini-series, examining the political, cultural, and military consequences of the invasions for both Japan and the Mongol Empire, and considering their long-term historical significance. Once we wrap up, we will return to the main narrative of the history of the Mongols. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the History of the Mongols. If you are enjoying the series and want to help support it, you could like the video, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from. Thank you, and see you all next time.